follow the jazz quartet is rule number one. So I have photographed over 5,000 people, and yet regardless of what they do or what they actually look like, with very few exceptions, they hate being photographed. And they're insecure about the way they look in photographs, and yet every day I have to make people like being photographed and like how they look. More specifically, I have to make total strangers totally comfortable with me and with themselves while a giant lens is pointed at their face. And this is not easy because something really interesting almost always happens in photo shoots, and that is that the minute the camera comes up, people's guards come up. Being photographed is a pretty unnatural state of being. You feel vulnerable, you feel exposed, you're aware that you're being looked at, studied even, and so you feel self-conscious, yet you don't want to look bad. And so this really weird disconnect happens, which is, it's this enormous gap between how you want to be seen and how you actually see yourself. Okay, now maybe that is my inner monologue at work here, but the point is, it makes sense that you're going to want to present the best version of yourself, when the real goal should be to present the truest version of yourself. And that's where it gets difficult. I know on both sides of the camera. Before I was a photographer, I was an actor, and I had to get headshots, and I dreaded it. I would microanalyze every fault in my face, or I would actually make up faults that didn't exist. And I never knew what me to be. I felt this pressure to be what my agent wanted me to be, or what my manager wanted me to be, or some idealized version of myself, more interesting, more handsome, way more charming. And I felt pressure because if I failed, well, then I wouldn't get an audition, my agent would dump me, and in my neurotic mind, I would never make a dime again. I would die homeless and alone in a gutter someplace, probably in Modesto, which would be terrifying. And the photographers I worked with, they didn't help very much. All I ever got was show me the funny or more intense. And it didn't work. I hated it. I felt self-conscious. So when I became a photographer, I think I had a subconscious mission, which was simply to help my clients like being photographed, because I thought this might make them like how they looked in photographs. And I realized this had become an actual effective process when a client told me something that became my career's little epiphany moment. He said he didn't look at my work and think, what an amazing photo. Instead, he looked at it and thought, what an amazing person. Because the people in the photos had let their guards down. They were alive and connected and honest and real, and pow. Something hit me, it coalesced for me. He didn't see how my clients looked. He saw how they felt. And I realized that the act of creating a compelling portrait, it had very little to do with f-stop or aperture. It was about empowering the people I worked with to know that they were enough, so they could let down their guards and take off their masks. And the thing is, we've all been taught to put on masks our entire lives. Now, in photos, it probably started when we were kids and our parents said, say cheese, when we didn't really feel like smiling. But the point is, we've all learned to control our appearance and to put on our best face. But this best face that you put on, it may not be your truest face. It's a pose. And when we pose for the camera, we look artificial and our images don't connect to anyone. And I think that what we do in photography can be a microcosm for what we do in the world. We all pose, but not just for the camera. We all pose in life, which is ironic because if there's anything I've learned as a photographer, it is that it is our unposed self that's most beautiful. It is our individuality that makes us attractive. It's our idiosyncrasies that make us unique. When you show the real you with all your quirks, you're far more attractive than when you pretend those quirks don't exist. When you let people look into you, You're far more attractive than when you only let them look at you. Now, you may remember a few years ago there was this TV show called Britain's Got Talent, and a contestant named Susan Boyle. And she walked out on the stage, and she was wearing a frumpy housecoat, and she was overweight, and people thought she was funny looking, and the judges actually laughed at her. And the audience laughed too, and they said, "Go ahead, just get it over with, sing." And then she did. And her voice was strong and beautiful, and the very same people who were laughing at her just moments earlier, they stopped. And they became quiet, and they listened, and they put their hands over their mouths, and then they wept. Now, in this moment, she had changed in their eyes. Why? Because now they saw who and what she was, not how she looked. She had acquainted them with something deeper than her appearance. And in the process, I think she had reacquainted them with their humanity. Now, she was not physically attractive, but she had become immensely beautiful. And I think this is the great paradox of beauty, that what we perceive as physically attractive is not the same as what we find truly beautiful. The poet Gibran said it perfectly. Beauty is not in the face. Beauty is a light in the heart. And my goal is to help my clients find the beauty in what makes them unique and to help them turn on the light in their hearts. And when they do, I've discovered that this light can stay on long after the studio lights go off. About 10 years ago, I photographed a 13-year-old girl, and she walked in the studio, and the first thing she said was, "I'm weird and I'm ugly." And it broke my heart because I wanted to let her know that the things that her peers made her think were weird were actually wonderful. They were the very things that made her an artist. And she was beautiful because she was exactly the way that God or fate or nature or whatever you believe in had intended her to be. The point is that the judgment we receive, the judgment she received, the judgment we all receive is usually wrong, and it is often nothing more than a repudiation of our individuality. Now, as I shot this girl and we talked and her confidence grew, her light came on. Her face changed. She became beautiful because she felt beautiful. I saw it. And the amazing thing is, my camera saw it too. Now, her shoot had nothing to do with composition or lighting, but it had everything to do with what portraiture is, because how you feel is how you look. It will always show, it cannot help but show. You actually can't control it. Now, your face has 42 muscles in it, and these muscles work involuntarily. When you feel something, they move magically all by themselves, and your face, it perfectly expresses what you're feeling. If you're happy, you smile. You don't think about it. But in photo shoots, you do think about it. And so you try to make these involuntary muscles into voluntary muscles. You consciously flex them to try to mimic an expression you think people want to see. Here's my intense face. Here's my confident face. And it's absurd. You can't fake it. You can't fake anything because the camera catches every lie. Which is why I tell my clients it is better to be yourself than pretend to be something you're not. Now, I know this applies in photography, but I believe it applies in life. You don't need to fake it for my camera or for the world because you are enough. You can be magical without a mask. All you need is self-acceptance. Dr. Seuss wrote, "Today you are you. This is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you." So I say, be yourself. Be beautifully, wholly, wonderfully, amazingly you. And when you do, you'll stop saying, "I don't want to smile," because you know that the gap in your teeth is gorgeous. And you don't need to hide it anymore. You'll stop saying, "I'm funny looking," and your quirks will become quintessential and alluring. At 15 years old, you'll say no to an industry executive who tells you to straighten your hair or to cover your freckles. When they tell you you're over the hill, you start climbing up it with joy, and you start a new career after 70. When they tell you you're not black enough, you laugh in their face. And at 7 years old, when they say you're too dark-skinned to be an actress, you say, I'm just right. Because it is the color of your spirit that matters. And above all else, you know that your crutches are not a crutch at all. Now, it's my job to empower my clients to know that they are enough so they can take off the masks that cover their true beauty. I know this helps them shine in photographs, but I believe this idea can help us all shine in life. So I encourage every one of you, take off your masks whenever possible. Show the truest version of yourself. Embrace your idiosyncrasies. Let your guard down in places you don't normally do it. Do it at the office. Do it at school. Do it at home. Do it when you're out with friends. Do it on a blind date. Or God forbid, if you ever need to be photographed. Thank you.